think it's safe to say that most people listening to this program or watching it on Free Speech TV agree that it is time to get big money out of politics. The real question before us now is, what's the best way to do that? Our next guest has some thoughts on that topic. Mike Monetta is the national director of Wolfpack, which was co-founded by our good friend Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. Wolfpack is dedicated to getting big money out of politics. And first of all, Mike, thanks for coming on the program.
You bet. Thank you for having me, RJ.
Oh, of course. But let me ask you this question. Okay, getting big money out of politics, we all agree it's a good thing. We all, let's say in our little living room of viewers and people on this program right now, how do we do that?
Well, I'll tell you our plan. And this was something that, initially Cenk came up with years ago. He was, really sick of telling his audience that there's all this corruption happening in Washington, D.C., but no way to actually fix it, right? And for those of us who watch TYT, well, you don't have to watch long to know Cenk's not the type of person to put out a plan. That's BS. He really is going to research stuff. He's going to put a lot of thought into it. So he spent 3 years researching, how do we fix this? And he went to conventions. He talked to all the groups out there working on this. And he found that we need an amendment to do this because we want to fix it for the long run. We don't want to just get a Supreme Court ruling that can be overturned again in 20 years, depending on who's sitting on the bench. State legislation is not going to be strong enough to be able to go over the Supreme Court, and we've already seen that in a couple places. Montana is a good example, where they had 100 years of good campaign finance laws that essentially were thrown out by some of the rulings, such as Citizens United, that the Supreme Court has made over the last few decades. So once he determined that we need an amendment to solve this problem, he said, well, how do we do that? So it's not all that complicated. There are only 2 ways, according to our Constitution. One of those ways is through Congress, the very people who are essentially the problem right now. 2/3 of them can propose an amendment out to the states for ratification. The other way to do it is you get 2/3 of the states to apply for a convention for a specific purpose, and we can go around Congress that way and propose the amendment through the states. Now, either way it's done, all we're talking about there is who's going to propose the amendment. And then that ratification threshold is always going to be the same. It's 38 states, 75% of our state governments would need to approve an amendment before it actually becomes part of the Constitution.
So your approach
that's what we're doing.
Constitutional amendment, I got that. I get the logic. And now there are other groups on the left, or progressive groups, that want to see big money out of politics, but feel this is the wrong way to go about it. And I should say, before we go on, we tried pretty hard to get a couple of these groups to come on the show with you and with us to talk about that. And for a variety of reasons, I don't want to speculate, but none of them were willing to do it. So I may play devil's advocate a little bit here as we go along. But there is certainly a school of thought that says that to get a constitutional amendment, you need a constitutional convention, and a constitutional convention could become a runaway event, as has happened most notably in the convention that formed our current Constitution, that it was given certain marching orders to stick to certain parameters and certain topics, but it got out of control. So the fear, as it has been expressed by some other groups, Mike Monetta, is that, well, okay, we create a constitutional amendment, it gets ratified by the appropriate number of states, a convention takes place, and because the delegates are appointed, Republicans have 2/3 of the state houses in the country right now, so they'll appoint a preponderance of the delegates to this convention who will take it over and do horrible things like having given corporations personhood, taking personhood away from people. I mean, I'm making one example, but they'll do terrible things. And so they say that's not the way to go. What's your response to that?
Well, there's a lot in there. And first of all, let me just say thank you for reaching out to some of those organizations who have been opposing this path, the Article 5 path. We're always willing to have the conversation anytime. So, I would say let's keep those invitations coming, because we believe it's just way too important to not at least be having the conversation about it. And so let me just address the I guess, the idea of a runaway convention.
Yeah.
It's legally, factually not a possibility. And up until the 1970s, it didn't even exist as a theory. We, before I get into that, let me just tell you a little bit about the history of the Article 5 path. And the early 1900s, the American people found themselves in a very similar situation to what we have today, right? Our senators, our U.S. senators, used to be appointed by the state legislatures rather than elected. And the Senate was known as the Millionaires Club. It was seen almost the same way that our Congress is today, controlled by special interests and wealthy elites. So the people started using every tool available to them to fix this problem. They did petitions. They passed local legislation. The state started passing resolutions asking Congress to propose an amendment on this. And then finally, when there was no action, the states started calling for a convention one by one for that one specific purpose of the direct election of senators. And they got all the way to just one state shy that would force a convention, the 2/3 that they needed back then. And Congress finally responded and proposed the amendment themselves. So there's actually historical precedence for using this as a tool, and it was used initially by progressives in the early 1900s. Now, in the 1970s, 80s, there was a very strong push for a convention call for a balanced budget amendment, and so there were a couple of groups, the John Birch Society and Common Cause, started pushing back against the idea of a balanced budget, but in this case, the idea of a convention in general, just as a tool of democracy, which is the unfortunate part. So the truth, though, is if you just all you have to do is read Article 5, right? Now, just to address your point about the runaway convention and constitutional convention, Article 5 is crystal clear that a convention only has the power to propose. So when people talk about the idea of a runaway convention or the Koch brothers or somebody rewriting the Constitution at a convention, it's not a reality. It's a talking point that was made up in the 70s and the 80s to combat this movement for a balanced budget convention. Now, just coming out and saying, hey, I'm not in favor of a balanced budget is a hard thing to do politically. So it's much easier to just scare people and say, let's not have a convention at all for any reason. Now, I think it's very easy to see if, let's say that it is true that there are more quote unquote red states than blue states right now. But if it was the opposite, if there were more blue states than red states, you would hear the exact same thing from the other side. You would hear the conservatives going, there's no way we want a convention because George Soros is going to rewrite the Constitution. George Soros can't rewrite the Constitution at a convention any more than the Koch brothers can. What a convention is an opportunity for us, a good opportunity, and we're thankful that our founders put it in there. It's an opportunity for us to go around Congress and propose an amendment ourselves at the state level and get the amendment that we need. Now, Wolfpack doesn't believe that we'll actually get all the way to a convention. We would love to see it because we think it's a democratic process, much more democratic than Congress is right now. We think a better amendment would come out of the states. But the much more likely scenario is that if we can build this pressure, 5, 10, 15, 20 states demanding this convention for free and fair elections to deal with specifically the issue of big money in politics and Citizens United and related cases, Congress is almost definitely going to propose something and fix this themselves because at the end of the day, it's just way too populist of an issue. I mean, this is the #1 polling issue in the country right now. You saw it with the presidential election. The reason that Donald Trump initially rose to the top of the primaries, it's why Bernie Sanders, got so much momentum is because, he was the candidate that didn't take big money. So, no, you can't change the Constitution at a convention. This is an opportunity for us to make a stand that we understand the urgency of this issue. And that's what it comes down to for us, is that this issue of fixing our elections and getting big money out of politics is so urgent that we have to use every tool available to us. We can't sit around and wait for Congress to fix this. If you look at climate change, we're already past what they told us was too late. And then healthcare, people are literally dying because of our corrupt system. The internet, it just died like an hour ago.
Well, we'll get it back, but it's going to take some work.
We will get it back. Yes.
Yeah, I hear you on all of those issues, Mike, and I share your sense of urgency. I share your sense that we have to do an end run around Congress. But what about, and I just want to make sure we're clear on this. So you're saying that, after I assume the appropriate legal review, I know Cenk is a lawyer and but after the appropriate legal review and so on, that even if we got to a constitutional convention, if if the amendments that created that convention instructed delegates to only address the one issue of getting money out of politics, they couldn't turn around and suddenly outlaw homosexuality or premarital sex or what have you. Is that true? Is that your
That is true.
yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Well, first of all, the convention can't make any laws, so they couldn't even get big money out of politics. A convention couldn't fix this issue. All a convention can do is propose amendments that might fix this issue, that have to go out of the convention and then be approved by 38 state governments after it's crafted. So, no, the convention can't act. It can't create laws. It can only propose amendments. It can't change the Constitution. And that's the biggest point. Now, if you look at, there is a lot of scholarly research done about this. You can read, the Department of Justice did an exhaustive 60-page report on it. The Congressional Research Service, who is one of the more respected organizations down on Capitol Hill, known for being bipartisan, they've done, like, I think 5 reports now, one as recent as last month, about the Article 5 convention process. The American Bar Association. All of the serious scholars that have looked at this do conclude that the states have the power to call a limited convention and that there are mechanisms in place for those limitations to be enforced. And if you, I mean, let's think it through a little bit, right? So one of the enforcements is Congress itself. According to the Constitution, if once 2/3 of the states apply for a convention, they have to call for it, right? Mm-hmm. So they're likely to pass, and this is in the reports that I was just talking about, the Department of Justice and a couple others. Congress is likely to pick a time and a place. The convention, the 34 applications have been satisfied. There's going to be a convention. It's going to be in this town. It's going to be on these dates, and it's going to be on this topic, right? So Congress itself wants an open convention less than the American people probably do, right? They don't want to give up their power. Right now, they have a monopoly to propose amendments. They're a constitutional open convention every time they go into the office on Capitol Hill. They can propose anything any day of the week. The only thing stopping it from being part of the Constitution is consensus and the ratification process, right? Do you know how many amendments have been proposed by Congress since our founding?
I do not.
It's over 11,000.
Oh, that's a lot. Okay.
Right. But so the process works. They didn't make it into the Constitution, and that's all we're talking about here. It's really important to go back to that. And let me just add one more thing about these reports. One of the things that they cite is, right now, Congress is constitutionally required to call a convention upon the application of 2/3 of the states. Mm-hmm. But since our founding, the states have submitted over 400 applications from all 50 states on a variety of issues. So that means that they're not calling the convention because they're counting them based on subject matter. And we've never gotten to 34 on one subject. And we have gotten close. Like I said before, the 17th Amendment came really close on that one subject. And we have gotten close on the balanced budget, although that's gone back and forth. They got really high in the 80s. A lot of states rescinded theirs. They've got a little bit of momentum again. But the really important thing to remember here, though, RJ, I think when we're talking about, if your concern is that the right wing or the conservatives are going to rewrite the Constitution and do it and get a convention for their purposes, we're not helping them. If you consider yourself on the left, our movement at Wolfpack is not helping them to get that convention. We're not legitimizing the process anymore by passing resolutions asking for a convention to get big money out of politics. It's already in the Constitution. That's legitimate enough, right?
Oh, right.
So
and by the way,
they can have that convention. I mean, they have every right to call for it.
Yeah, and by the way, I've never been a supporter of tactics that delegitimize any process based on the short-term gain you want to get from that. I've always believed that the movements I support are best served by a dedication to the truth, even if it's inconvenient at times. So I get exactly what you're saying. So in the minute we have left, and I think you answered my questions very well, in the minute we have left, I do want to say, and I'll give you the final word, but I do want to say that, in my past work with the Young Turks, and I, was semi-regular on the show for a while when I was in California and been with the shows, around the show since the beginning. When you guys were formed, I did see some of the short films that were made. And one of the things that always strikes me about this issue, one of the things that was illustrated in your films and some of the things you guys used to talk about, is the bipartisan nature of the support for this idea. The fact that, you know, in Washington here, when people talk about bipartisan, it's what I usually describe as buying both parties. You know, that's my definition of bipartisan. But among voters, this has enormous bipartisan support. And I'm always struck by, in one of the Wolf Pack films, the number, for example, of New England legislators, Republicans, who said, boy, I wish you could succeed at this, because we'll be getting, I won't have to spend hours a day raising money. I can actually do what I, you know, went into politics to do. So we got about 30 seconds left.
Yeah.
You agree with that, I assume?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's why we feel that the convention was like almost tailor-made for this specific issue. If we get a convention around getting big money out of politics, the whole country is going to be demanding a good amendment out of that convention. This is our opportunity to get an actual free and fair election system and a true democracy back. And yeah, when we go out and we talk to voters, it doesn't matter. Party does not matter whatsoever to us. We could be in the reddest districts of, you know, Alabama. You know, we passed, by the way, through the Missouri Senate with like 17 Republicans and 6 Democrats. We had a Republican stand up and say, I want to put an end to the campaign industrial complex.
Right,
you know,
that's
so,
right. Well said. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, of course, yeah. All Americans want this corruption ended, and we want real democracy in this country.
And my
But
favorite
we've got to
thing,
go after it. We've got to be, you know, we've got to go after it with every tool we have.
and my favorite thing about Wolfpack is that once you, Jank or somebody came up with that catchy name, Wolfpack, you didn't try to think of a lame acronym for WOLF. You just called it Wolfpack, which I like. So Mike Monetta, Executive Director of Wolfpack, where can people go to find out more about what you guys are doing?
You can just go to our website, wolf-pack.com. That's PAC. And you can just click on Take Action and volunteer in your state. You know, if you don't have time to get involved, then just $10 a month keeps us going. We're completely grassroots. 99% of our funding comes from $10 a month, people paying $10 a month in it. We've been able to achieve, you know, 5 states so far calling for this convention with just that little bit we have. So yeah, it all helps. All right, this is a movement that we all need to just put a little bit of time or money aside and just get it fixed, you know, and then we can fix all the other big issues. But we've got to focus on this one first.
All right. Michael Monetta, thanks for coming on the program.
All right. Thanks, RJ. Appreciate it.
You bet.